Welcome everyone to the second Spring 2022 lecture presented by the Milwaukee Society of the Archaeological Institute of America. My name is Jane Peterson and I'm currently serving as president of our local Milwaukee Society. I'm thrilled that you've decided to spend part of your Sunday afternoon with us. Today's lecture by Dr. Chris Fisher promises to be a real treat. Warmest welcome to all of our members and friends from the Milwaukee community. Greetings also to students from UWM and Marquette who are in our audience today. And to those of you joining us from further afield, it's a pleasure to have you with us as well. Our temperatures in Milwaukee this weekend rose into the 50s, and the warmth gives those of us in the upper Midwest reasons to dream about spring days ahead. We're also hopeful because we're feeling the weight of COVID beginning to lighten a bit as well. One of my greatest hopes is that we'll be able to resume our in-person lectures and other programming this coming fall. And once again, we should all thank Bettina Arnold, without whom our online lectures would not have been possible. During today's Zoom webinar, your microphones will be automatically muted. You can submit your questions for our speaker at any time during the lecture by typing them into the Q&A box accessible using the icon on your screen. And after Dr. Fisher has finished his lecture, we'll read your questions to him. Before I introduce today's speaker, please allow me just a few moments to tell you about some of the ways the Archaeological Institute of America works to promote and support archaeology. Participation in the National Lecture Program is one of the primary benefits that our local societies enjoy. Every year, with the financial and logistic support of the AIA, we're able to bring our community free public lectures given by world-renowned archaeologists to share their fascinating discoveries and insights. This year, our AIA membership dues funded 2 national speakers. The first, some of you may recall, was Dr. Leslie Gregorica, and then today's lecturer, Dr. Fisher as well. As a reminder, many societies are still hosting their lectures virtually through the end of the season anyway, and as a result, every one of you has the option of attending an amazing array of both national and local lectures hosted by AIA societies across the US and Canada. I encourage you to take a moment and look over the upcoming lecture titles on the AIA's calendar of events page. From ancient Greek dress to Ice Age art and everything in between. No matter what your interests, there's truly something for everyone with an interest in archaeology. Since 1879, the Archaeological Institute of America has been supporting archaeology through a number of programs. Beyond the high impact lectures like those just described, the AIA actively supports archaeology in many other ways as well. From supporting professional archaeologists with research funding to providing scholarships that enable students to participate in fieldwork. From making research accessible through all of their publications to being an active force protecting and preserving sites. No matter what your level of training or areas of interest, AIA's programs benefit everyone who shares a curiosity about archaeology. The AIA also plays a central role in disseminating archaeological research through its publications. Members receive one or both of the publications shown here as a benefit of membership. The American Journal of Archaeology is one of the flagship academic journals in archaeology that focuses on research in the Mediterranean world. Archaeology is a beautifully illustrated magazine published 6 times each year. Every issue highlights new discoveries and provides in-depth stories on a range of topics. The articles are reliably engaging in the very best tradition of science writing, and it really is a wonderful perk of membership. So if you're looking for a unique and affordable gift for someone with an interest in archaeology, history, or travel, consider giving a membership to the AIA that comes with a subscription to Archaeology magazine. It's a thoughtful gift, and it will help the AIA continue their important work. As folks start to engage more fully with in-person public-facing activities, AIA is ready to help by providing a full range of outlets to explore archaeology. The annual Fieldwork Opportunities Bulletin helps students and volunteers identify opportunities to train in archaeological fieldwork around the world. The AIA Tour Program is currently running small group tours, both land-based and on ships. These tours involve numerous educational excursions, and you can learn more by visiting the AIA website. Other hands-on events include the annual International Archaeology Day celebration. We hope to restart our Milwaukee International Archaeology Day in 2022 with another all-ages interactive event with local experts who share what they know about archaeology in a public setting, but stay tuned for more on that. With all of these benefits in mind, I'd encourage all of you to support the AIA. If you aren't a member, please consider joining. There are a variety of levels of membership, and all of them are reasonably priced. And many cost less than you'd expect to pay for the subscription to Archaeology magazine alone. For example, undergraduate memberships are just $25. Teachers in grades K through 12 and military personnel can join for just $40 a year. As I mentioned before, memberships and publications make great gifts. Active students, lifelong learners alike. If you're local and decide to join, please remember to designate Milwaukee as your local society. We're hoping to keep our Milwaukee Society numbers strong, so please consider joining. And if you're already a member, well then thank you for sticking with us during the challenges of COVID. And please remember to renew your subscription when you receive a reminder from our AIA membership office or our society treasurer, Alice Kehoe. As a nonprofit organization, the AIA depends on gifts to sustain and grow their programs. Your gifts are tax deductible and allow the good works of the AIA going forward. If you're considering making a gift and would like to learn more, please don't hesitate to contact me. My contact information is easy to find on AIA Milwaukee's website. Dr. Fisher has generously agreed to allow us to record his lecture. The recording will be added to our local Milwaukee website soon after the lecture. So if you'd like to listen again, or you know someone who might enjoy hearing it, those are options. It's now my distinct honor and privilege to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Christopher Fisher. As I mentioned before, Dr. Fisher is one of AIA's national speakers this year. Some of you undoubtedly are already familiar with Dr. Fisher's work, perhaps from one of his popular TED Talks or from Douglas Preston's 2017 best-selling book, Lost City of the Monkey God, about which I trust we will be hearing more this afternoon. Whatever the case, we're thrilled to have him join us today and look forward to hearing more about his exciting research. Chris Fisher has a local Wisconsin connection, having received both his MA and PhD degrees from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He held a one-year postdoctoral fellowship at Arizona State University after finishing his degree. And after several years at Kent State, he moved to Colorado State University in Fort Collins, where he's been teaching since 2005, and where currently he's a professor of anthropology. Chris's work explores the connection between human societies and environments through a variety of archaeological and earth science methodologies, including geoarchaeology, full coverage survey, excavation, remote sensing, and LiDAR technologies. Since the early 1990s, Dr. Fisher's research has centered on several projects, including the ancient Tarascan city of Angamuco, located in Michoacán, Mexico. Chris is also the lead archaeologist for the Mosquitia archaeological project in northeastern Honduras. In 2013, Chris was recognized as a National Geographic Explorer as part of this work. His fieldwork in Honduras was featured in the October 2015 issue of National Geographic magazine, and also in the Lost City of the Monkey God book previously mentioned. Most recently, he founded and is directing the Earth Archive project, with the ambitious goal of creating a 3D scan of the entire surface of our planet as a tool for education, conservation, and cultural and natural resource preservation. His work appears in many professional venues, including edited volumes such as Seeking a Richer Harvest, an introduction to the archaeology of subsistence intensification, innovation, and change, published by Plenum, and The Archaeology of Environmental Change, Socio-Natural Legacies of Degradation and Resilience, published by the University of Arizona Press, as well as in journals such as the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences and American Anthropologist. In addition, he's mobilized his research through a number of popular sources, magazines, public appearances, blogs, and the like. Chris has conducted fieldwork and directed projects in several areas of the US, Mexico, Honduras, Portugal, Albania. He gets around. His work is supported by the NSF, National Geographic, NASA, IBM, and others. Dr. Fisher also received the Gordon Wiley Award in 2007, which recognizes the best archaeological paper published in American Anthropologist, which is the flagship journal of the American Anthropological Association. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Fisher presenting today's AIA Milwaukee Society lecture entitled The Application of LiDAR Scanning for Documenting Ancient Cities and Regions. I will stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Dr. Fisher.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm hoping you can see that and it's shared properly. And thank you, Jane and Bettina, for having me, and thank you for the chapter for also having me. It's exciting. I wish I could have come to, I love Wisconsin, and I wish I could have come there in person, but this will have to be the next best thing. And but I hope I can live up to that introduction. As I was saying before the talk, I almost feel like I'm not an archaeologist anymore, because we've been, I've been doing this Earth Archive work. I'm a professor of archaeology and anthropology at Colorado State University. I'm also the founder and director of the nonprofit Earth Archive project, which I'm going to talk a lot about today. I never know exactly what people are going to be interested in, so I'm going to give you kind of a grab bag. Let's see, I need to open my chat here if it will allow me to do that. So I will be watching the chat here on my left side of my screen, and I'll have the questions open as well. And I'll try to connect with people if they drop something in there. And if I miss it, then we can just hopefully pick it up at the end. I should also tell you that I'm going to be using such trigger words such as climate change, earth, landscape, disaster, humans, narco dictator, and probably some other stuff. So hopefully that doesn't offend people. It has offended Facebook, but hopefully that won't offend you. So without further ado, I'll actually get going here. The most amazing place, the most astounding place that I've ever been is the Mosquitia jungle in Honduras. And I've done fieldwork all over the world. And I thought I knew what to expect, but I was totally wrong. On my first day in what can only be described as a pristine tropical wilderness, as I walked towards the ancient city that I was there to document, I realized that this was the only place where I'd ever been where I didn't see a single shred of plastic. That's how remote it was. And perhaps it's surprising to learn that there are still places on Earth so untouched by people. But it's true, there are still thousands of places where humans haven't stepped for centuries or maybe forever. And I have loads of stories about being dropped into this jungle, this pristine place, this remote place where the stories range from crazy official visits to getting stuck in the mud and falling down hills, to seeing animals that were totally unafraid of us, had zero experience with people, including a lot of cats, which and animals that were thought to have been extinct or just simply not around in central Mexico, to the worst latrine that I've ever experienced in my life. And I'll tell you one quick story about this latrine. One of my students brought in a bunch of New Yorkers and assembled a magazine stand on the side. Of course, I can't tell if people are laughing. But he assembled a magazine stand on the side of this latrine and put a bag over it so it would stay dry, and put all of his New Yorkers, carefully arrange them in there. And, you know, the problem with that, and that would have been great, but the problem was that this latrine was so muddy and slippery and disgusting that it required all your skills. It was an all hands on deck situation to not fall into this thing, which did happen to a couple of people. There's so much left to discover, and yet we're running out of time. It's a great time to be a scientist. We have the tools and technology to understand our planet like never before, and yet we're running out of time. In the coming decades, due to the climate crisis, forests will turn to grasslands. The shapes of continents will become unrecognizable due to rising sea levels. Vast swaths of the world will become desertified. And all of this will have devastating impacts on the world's most vulnerable people. Where I am here in northern Colorado, it's going to look a lot like northern New Mexico in 20 years. Where you are in Milwaukee, or maybe your other places I know, but in Milwaukee, and we were just talking about this just before we started here, you may well have climate refugees. And I know some places in the Great Lakes are being advertised as climate refuges. I feel an urgency to my work that I didn't feel 20 years ago. How can we document everything before it's too late? And in many instances, we'll be documenting things that we had no idea that they were there. And to me, that's the real tragedy. And one real tragedy in all of this is that we're losing things that we don't even know exist. And they've never been documented, never been discovered, ecological and cultural treasures. And we will now never know that they existed. And we've reached a significant tipping point. And I want to just talk very briefly, or just point out one of those tipping points here in Colorado that is seeing a lot of, because of this, we're seeing a lot of renewed interest in the Earth Archive. And that was the Marshall Fire, which blew through Boulder County at the end of December due to high winds that were bringing the first big snowstorm of the season, very late, to the Front Range of Colorado. Devastating wildfire that happened in essentially suburban Denver. Not in the mountains, not some far-flung vacation spot in the mountains. This basically this is a suburb of Denver with box stores and apartments and houses. Even the local Tesla dealership, largely burned to the ground. People here in Colorado, though they shouldn't have been, were shocked by this fire, and it was, I think, a major tipping point moving forward. We only have one shot, we only have one planet, and we only have one shot to save it. And as scientists, innovators, social activists, entrepreneurs, avocational scientists, or archaeologists, we need data to know what works. And right now in 2021, that data set does not exist. In 2022, sorry. The answer, a high resolution LiDAR scan of the Earth's surface, starting with the areas most threatened. And again, my TED Talk was mentioned. And here's a quote from my TED Talk. If the Earth is the Titanic, we've hit the iceberg, everyone's on deck, and the orchestra is playing. Shouldn't we save everything we can on the lifeboats? This TED Talk is the most viewed archaeology TED Talk that exists to date. I'm amazed by that. I can't imagine that so many people watched it. And if you do happen to watch it after this talk, click a bunch of times because I'm trying to boost my view count. But I think that the broader message for that is that we as archaeologists, need to choose these venues in which we can provide greater views and visibility for what we do, because I do believe that what we do is so important, and the public is so interested in what we do. And this is just one example of how we can expand our reach. When I publish an academic paper, I don't know how many people read it. 10, 20, 30, 40, 1.8, almost 1.8 million people have watched this TED Talk, which just blows me away every time I think about it. It's a full resolution, a full high resolution scan of the Earth's surface. It sounds like science fiction, but we already have the technology to do this. In 2019, we watched in horror as the Notre Dame Cathedral went up in flames, practically burned to the ground. Miraculously, scientists had scanned the cathedral, art historians had scanned the cathedral using LiDAR in 2010. The French government just announced a huge plan of reconstruction, and those records are proving invaluable to the reconstruction of Notre Dame. We need a scan like Notre Dame, but for the Earth. And that's what the Earth Archive Project is about. It's about creating that background scan. Just imagine if we had a perfect replica of the Earth, a digital twin, with every rock, tree, and settlement captured in high resolution 3D. What could we do with that record? What have we already started to do with the scans that we've done as part of the Earth Archive? We can map every tree, document its size, height, width, calculate how much carbon those trees contain, to more accurately measure fuel loads to help combat wildfires. We can help build resilient communities and infrastructure. And we can help some of the world's most vulnerable people with land tenure and other disputes, along with doing amazing archaeology. And I'm going to give you two examples of the kinds of archaeology that I've done using these high resolution LiDAR records. Most importantly, though, we could build a legacy for our children, their grandchildren, and our grandchildren's children. A legacy of what the Earth looks like today. Because in 10 years, it will have fundamentally changed. And we lack those background baseline data. And of course, we know how to do it. Airborne LiDAR involves shooting a dense grid of infrared beams from some sort of aerial platform. Right now, it's a helicopter or a fixed wing aircraft. In the future, it will be UAVs or drones, but the payloads and the range that's available for those UAVs, at least the civilian models that we have access to, is not great enough to do the kinds of work that we're proposing to do. And unfortunately, we're running out of time. We need to do these scans yesterday. That dense grid of when one of those infrared beams reaches something on the Earth's surface, it could be the top of a tree, it could be a rock on the ground, it could be the trunk of a tree. It returns back to the sensor on the aircraft, and it gives you a measure of distance. There are about 500,000 of those pulses that are fired out per second from that instrument. And what you end up with is not a photograph, but a dense cloud of points, which is actually illustrated here in this video from Honduras with this kind of representation of what that point cloud actually looks like. And by using computer software, we can filter that point cloud to show different parts, different aspects of what we might be interested in. So as an archaeologist, I practice what I call digital deforestation, which is scrubbing away the vegetation digitally so I can see the ground surface and the archaeology below. But all of that stuff that I spend hours and hours scrubbing away, filtering away, are the careers of hundreds of other scientists who are studying fuel loads, species composition, the number of trees in an environment, tree density, geology, hydrology. Frankly, the list is endless. These point cloud records are like the Swiss Army knife. It's like the Swiss Army knife of remote sensing, basically. So that idea to scan the entire surface of the Earth, 29.2% of the Earth, is basically the Earth Archive, which is a nonprofit organization and mission I launched from the TED stage in 2019. And we know these records work because we've done it before. I've successfully used these records to discover lost cities and cultures in the Americas. And these records are being used by a host of scientists to study the Earth today and to project what the Earth will look like in the future. And we have a big publication coming out, an opinion piece on March 9th, just in a few days in PNAS, that outlines the whole sort of broader Earth Archive plan. And so please sort of look for that on March 9th. I guess that's in 3 days. So how did I get started with remote sensing? I've been working for a long time in the Lake Pátzcuaro Basin, which is the cultural core of the Purépecha Empire. At the time of European contact, central Mexico is dominated by two empires. First of which you've probably heard of, which is the Aztec Empire. The second one you perhaps never heard of, and that's the Purépecha or Tarascan Empire. The Aztecs dominated East Central Mexico. The Purépecha dominated West Central Mexico. Unlike the Mosquitia example that I've talked about, and I'm going to talk about here in a minute, Lake Pátzcuaro is a densely settled, heavily trafficked major tourist zone. Thousands of people roll through there every year. In 2009, I undertook a traditional full coverage survey, archaeological survey, using GPS units and handheld maps and other stuff, basic archaeology 101, walking across the landscape, documenting every site that we see. Expected to see a lot of small sites, maybe a couple medium-sized sites, nothing very large, because so much work has been done here. So many people have been through the lake basin. And I encountered a very large settlement. After surveying that settlement for about a week, my graduate students convinced me that we needed to find an edge, which is kind of the basic thing that you do when you do one of these surveys. So I grabbed a couple Cliff Bars, some water, a walkie-talkie, and I thought I could easily walk across this prominent landscape feature that this site was on, which is a malpais, or a very recent lava flow of badland, basically, that was densely forested and very rugged topography. After walking for about 2 hours, I reached the other side of that malpais feature. I said to myself, oh, well, here I am. I'm on the other side of the of this malpais. And I'm like, huh. There were houses and building foundations and vestiges of roads and pyramids and granaries and terraces and walls all the way across. Huh, this is probably a city. And then I was like, oh no, it's a city. Because I knew right away that I was going to be in trouble. There wasn't supposed to be a city there. People weren't going to believe me. The Mexican government was going to flip out. All of the recording and stuff that I had to do, all of my responsibilities to the Mexican government just increased by 100-fold. Everybody was going to be watching what we were doing. So finally I got back to the graduate students and I sat down and they're like, Chris, what did you find? And I told them, and they're like, oh, and they're all excited or whatever. And Chris, you don't seem very excited. I'm like, oh no, you guys don't understand. We're in for it now. This is a section of Angamuco. So I've just lifted off the vegetation. It's about 250 meters on a side. In the center, you can see a pyramid, has a circular element and a rectilinear element. Those are sometimes called yakitas. They're classic Purépechas style pyramids. It's in front of a large plaza with 2 altars and a whole bunch of other stuff, completely embedded within a modified landscape. We now know that Angamuco covers about 26 square kilometers. It has over 68,000 building foundations on it. Probably that's an estimate that we used from LiDAR data. And that is as many building foundations as you will find on the island of Manhattan. Now, of course, on Manhattan, those building foundations are not the tiny single-story structures of that you would find in a prehistoric city in Mexico. They're skyscrapers. The population density on Manhattan is not anywhere similar to what you find in Angamuco, but it is a similar number of building foundations. In 2010, I commissioned a LiDAR flight for Angamuco in conjunction with a colleague of mine here at Colorado State, Steve Lease. And when we got those data back and learned how to use them, when we looked at our first visualization from those point cloud data, I started to cry because I realized instantly that in 45 minutes of flying, that LiDAR collect had created data that would take, on an academic schedule, a teaching schedule, well over a decade. And the quality of those data were not comparable to the kinds of data that we could collect in the field. They were much, much better, significantly better. I realized, not immediately, of course, I wish I could say that a light bulb went off over the top of my head and I realized immediately if this was going to change anything. It took me a little while, but I did realize that this was fundamentally going to change not only archaeology, but practically all of the earth science disciplines and much more. And that is exactly what's happening now. The discovery of Angamuco, the use of LiDAR our use of LiDAR there, the press that we got for that came to the attention of a group of documentary filmmakers, Steve Elkins and Bill Benenson and Tom Weinberg. Tom's actually from Chicago. They had just flown LiDAR for 3 river valleys in northeast Honduras. They were looking for a legendary lost city that was supposed to be there. It wasn't there because it was legendary. It doesn't actually exist. But what they found instead were significant prehistoric occupations and landscape features. And it was completely amazing. I talked to Steve several times on the phone. Steve Elkins, he came out here to Fort Collins, where I'm based at Colorado State University. We looked at the data. I was pretty excited about it. It was pretty neat. Agreed to help them interpret it. The Honduran government released some of the findings from the data. It got an incredible amount of press and a huge backlash. Because of that, I got super annoyed, and I agreed that I would go down into the field in this Mosquitia area and help do some of the field verification to confirm our results. Honduras is an especially dangerous place. It's the original banana republic. It's always been hotly contested and on the edge of collapse since the first Spaniards arrived in the late 1520s, probably. The country's rugged, much of it's inaccessible, and it's long been a haven for pirates, smugglers, and malcontents, and today is no different. It has been the center of Operation Anvil, which was designed to funnel narco trafficking through Honduras, where it could be better controlled by the US military. And we have a massive military presence in Honduras. So for example, the Honduran Air Force, I think, has right now, because there's been some accidents, they have 6 operable helicopters. In the United States has about between 60 and 80 helicopters, including Blackhawks, Sea Stallions, Chinooks, etc. There's a lot of political unrest. There have been several coups. Has the highest murder rate in the world. High poverty, a lot of climate migration, constant attempts on the lives of officials, government officials. It's not exactly a safe place. In this picture on the lower right, you'll notice that there are bags of cocaine. And that building and that wall may look familiar in some of the later photos, because that is the building that we used as our field laboratory when we conducted the field verification and excavation at the City of the Jaguar, which some people call Ciudad Blanca. This is where we actually would store our luggage. And it's one of the reasons that one of our suitcases always have dogs alert on it. Whenever we travel internationally, I actually try not to use that suitcase anymore, because it causes constant hassles, because it has been exposed to this area here where they would store confiscated cocaine. The most remote place in Central America is the Mosquitia tropical forest. It's the zone of northeastern Honduras and Nicaragua. Mosquitia refers to the musketeers of the 19th century, not insects. Although, if you've read Doug Preston's book, you will know that there are plenty of insects there. It's often called the Little Amazon, the jewel of Honduras, the jewel of Central America. It has many unknown species of plants and animals, and it represents the largest contiguous remaining section of old growth tropical forest in Central America. It's critically important ecologically, and it's critically important culturally. It has many national and international protections. It's an indigenous biosphere or indigenous reserve. It's a UN biosphere. It has lots of national protections. But there are no resources to implement any of those things. It is intensely threatened by deforestation. And this is deforestation not for the trees, although they will recover large trees if they do find them. But it's for cattle raising. Most of it to wash narco money. And when we were there in Catacamas doing our field work, we saw buyers for McDonald's, Burger King, Taco Bell, many other fast food restaurants. This is a shot. It's not the greatest shot, but it's a shot. It's taken from the door of a helicopter that is just popped up out of the canopy over the City of the Jaguar. And you can see off in the distance the smoke in the kind of the mid part of your screen there. That is the nearest deforestation to the largest site that we identified in the LiDAR data, which I call the City of the Jaguar. It's about 10 kilometers away, or at least it was in 2016 when this photo was taken. I actually don't know how close it is now. And that's what some of that deforestation actually looks like. And yes, they are raising cattle on these tracks. They clear them, raise cattle for several years, and then abandon them and move on. Cattle are great ways to wash narco money. And that's pretty much exactly what's happening. Once this old growth tropical forest is removed, it cannot be replaced. It is a remnant from a prior climate regime. And so it will be replaced, if it's reforested, by something else, by a different kind of forest. There's a long history of adventuring here. All of it, most of it, and I'm not talking about the fantastic work of Doris Stone or any real archaeologists that work there, but there is a long history of adventuring, a lot of it fraudulent, a lot of it centered on this crazy supposed lost city of the monkey god, which was a fabrication by Captain R. Stewart Murray, who was not actually a captain of anything. He just called himself a captain. And it was exacerbated by the claims of Theodore Mord, which was picked up by the media, and is detailed in great detail in Doug's book. And I'll give you some, actually, I just looked at the questions. I'll give you some figures on how long it'll take to record the world surface at the end, which is, this adventuring is recorded in great detail in Doug's book. I can talk about it at the end if there's time, if people want to see it. But honestly, it bores me to tears. I'm so uninterested in the adventuring. What we saw in the initial LiDAR data clearly showed two cities anchored within a completely human modified landscape with canals, terraces, a possible reservoir, and a whole bunch of other stuff. If you'll notice, this video looks so janky. It looks janky, and that is because our university computers are having so much trouble processing these point cloud data, which tend to be kind of massive in this format. Architecture in this region is made from earth and perishable materials rather than stone. So you don't see the kind of stone monuments that you might see in the Maya region, for example. What you see are mounds. Our initial findings got a lot of press, as I mentioned before. New York Times, the New Yorker, etc. It led to a lot of backlash. I agreed to go into go to the and because of this, frankly I got so annoyed with the backlash, personal attacks on me, etc., that I agreed to go do the field verification, basically. So in 2015, sponsored by one of the filmmakers, Bill Benenson, we brought a helicopter down. Access to the site is by helicopter only. Assembled a team. Helicopter was brought in from San Diego. We didn't know if there was going to be an appropriate landing zone. So we actually were trained to jump out of the helicopter, rappel out of the helicopter in midair. Thank God I didn't have to do that, because I probably would have hurt myself having to do that. Everything that we saw in the initial LiDAR findings were there in the field, and so much more. At the center of the city was a cache of objects, groundstone objects, that had probably been left there as a termination deposit, a closing deposit, when the city was abandoned sometime in the 16th century due to European introduced disease. And these objects have lain there essentially untouched, except by the jungle, for centuries. There were about 40 objects that were visible on the surface. They're large groundstone. They're called locally groundstone objects. They're called locally metates because they look like the kinds of metates that you might grind maize on. They're not metates, they're seats. They're actually seats of elites, tripod seats. there were about 40 of those visible on the ground. And it immediately started a debate about what to do with these objects. And this discovery in these objects was featured in the 2015, October 2015 issue of National Geographic. And as part of that, we actually did one of these reconstructions, which was super, super fascinating and a lot of fun. And I can tell people how that's actually done at the end of the talk if they're interested. And that is a reconstruction of what part of the city probably looked like: 2 large central plazas with mounds, buildings on top of the mounds, hundreds of ordinary houses around the center of the city. Finding those artifacts immediately led to a debate about what to do with them. And a lot of this is actually filmed and outlined in a documentary of the same name, which is available on the Science Channel online. You can actually rent it, I think. I don't know how much it is. It's not very much money. The Honduran government and several of the filmmakers wanted to remove all of the objects for safety and take them back to Tegucigalpa. Myself and the other scientists involved, basically I said, over my dead body, will these objects be removed in that way? They must be systematically excavated, and we'll basically leave if they're taken out any other way. Over my dead body proved very prescient because that could have indeed happened. That could have indeed have happened. Because of that, and I also should say, just as an aside, that this place that we stepped into when we went to do the field verification was so different than any other place that I'd ever been. We saw animals that weren't supposed to be there. There was no evidence of people at all, no plastic, etc. A later ecological blitz, a bio blitz that was done by Conservation International, documented what we saw and documented this essentially lost world, pristine world where people hadn't been for centuries. There are in this world more large cats than they've documented anywhere in Central America, including possibly a large raccoon-like cat that may be a new species. The spider monkeys in this area may be a new subspecies or species. And there are hundreds of insects and etc. plants that people thought haven't been documented in Honduras for decades. And incidentally, we were highly criticized initially for saying that these animals and plants were there. People didn't believe us. They said we had to be making it up. They said we were crazy, etc. They said that it was all PR they said it was all for PR. Same thing is true of the archaeology, which none of that, we've all demonstrated now that that's not, of course, true. And here are some of those cats. That first night in the jungle, when I woke up under my hammock, I saw the paw prints of white-lipped peccaries, or peccaries. I didn't know they were white-lipped peccaries. And jaguars underneath my hammock. They'd gone under there and they're completely unafraid of people. Because of the possibility of looting and danger to the artifacts, because of the tense political situation in Honduras, myself and the rest of the team felt that we had a moral and ethical responsibility to return to the jungle and remove systematically, scientifically, the correct way, remove those objects that needed to be removed to be safe, and conserve the rest of the deposit. And so we got a significant amount of money from National Geographic and the Honduran government to undertake that expedition. It was intensely complicated. We used Honduran helicopters, which in retrospect was a huge mistake. Everything had to be brought into the jungle location. Everything had to be brought out, including all of the artifacts. We had to carefully calculate how that would happen to ensure that we had enough fuel and aircraft time to accomplish that. On one of the last journeys out of the site, a door came off one of the Honduran helicopters, a Huey that was built in 1969, saw service in Vietnam, was refurbed by Taiwan, and then ended up back in Honduras for the Contra conflict. That door flew off the helicopter mid-flight, barely missed the rotor and the tail rotor, caused damage to the helicopter, almost killed everybody on it, and scared the absolute living crap out of me, because I had my people were on that helicopter, and if they had died in the jungle, I'm not sure how I would have dealt with that. Unfortunately, we were too late, and this is one of the heartbreaking things. It took me 6 months to gather just over $1 million in resources to undertake that excavation. But in the meantime, some of the objects had been removed. We think it was done. The only people in there were soldiers. They were guarding the deposit. We think it was done to politically embarrass the Honduran president, who was supporting all of this work, and then they returned the objects back to the site. Nonetheless, there were still hundreds of objects left in the deposit. So over the course of about a month, we recovered about 400 objects from the city. We're guarded by a team of soldiers at all times. Each artifact that we removed was recorded by the president's office, the military, the cultural office, and my team. It was kind of like doing archaeology in a fishbowl. We were able to document the organization of the cache. And the lab was removed, the field lab was removed from the site, was a helicopter flight away, and managing that, organizing that, made that just the whole thing incredibly difficult. This is actually footage that was taken by National Geographic. It's never been really used for anything. It's not been shown for anything. It's just a little trailer that was put together for that work. What we found was that the cache objects were arranged around 3 central groups of objects, representing vulture, death, and were-jaguar figures. The cache was an ofrenda, a termination deposit, with the seats arranged around those objects. And one way to think about it, and some of the objects were ritually killed in the deposit. And one way to think about it is sort of like the final council meeting of the city before it was abandoned, probably due to the impacts of European introduced disease, sometime we believe starting in the 1540s. There is some evidence that some objects were placed there. On top of those objects, ceramics and some other things, as an ofrenda after the time of that the city was actually abandoned. Here you see that this is what that deposit looks like after it's been churned by the jungle for several centuries. Here are some of those seats, those groundstone seats, and other vessels. All in all, it was an incredible, intense project. A lot of us got sick. We got tropical diseases. It was incredibly intense politically, etc. My wife still claims I have PTSD from it, which is probably true, I guess. But I think we did good work, and we achieved the goals of sort of why we were there and what we were trying to accomplish. And I should also say, we had Honduran archaeologists in there with us. It was a big cooperative venture. And it was, this site in the prehistory that it represents is incredibly important to the Honduran people. Even today, in spite of all the political machinations that have happened since we went to this place and excavated these materials. And I'm going to just skip over this just in the interest of time. I will talk about this, however. One of my greatest accomplishments, I think, as an archaeologist, we had to figure out a way to get the objects down off of the hill into essentially the landing zone. And right before I'd gone into the field, I'd assembled a set of lectures for my one of my archaeology classes. And I'd gone through all of this stuff, all these early images of the excavation of, basically by Howard Carter, of King Tut's tomb. And I noticed they used a screen to remove some of the artifacts. So here they're using a crib or a screen to actually remove one of the wheels of the chariots that were in Tut's tomb. And we faced a similar issue. We had to manually move those artifacts down. So one of my greatest accomplishments as an archaeologist, I had the soldiers build replicas of those screens, and we got Rubbermaid action packers and taped them on top. And then we put the objects inside, if they would fit inside those Rubbermaid action packers, put them right in the helicopter with bubble wrap and stuff to transport these very fragile and very heavy stone objects. I actually had them buy gold paint. I was going to paint the action packers gold to make it look like the Ark of the Covenant from the first Indiana Jones movie. But we didn't do that. And it's probably a good thing we didn't, because people would have picked up on that. And Lord only knows what the media would have said about that. Crazy stuff they would have said we found in there. In the end, so where is the site today? The Honduran president, Juan Orlando Hernandez, former Honduran president, who I've met several times. I've met his family. I took him on several tours of the site, had dinners with him at the National Palace, and his brother Tony. Started a nonprofit foundation, and they've done a little bit more excavation work there. I had told them that I didn't think any more work should actually happen there. It was just too dangerous. They were doing a lot of ecological protection and other work there. Juan Orlando lost the last presidential election, and his brother, right before that election, was convicted of narco trafficking. He was arrested in Miami, and will now be serving a life sentence, probably in Florence, Colorado, at the Supermax there with El Chapo, who they were also dealing with and received money from. Juan Orlando 2 weeks ago was arrested and paraded. He was about to give himself up. He was indicted in the U.S. There was the U.S. wants to extradite him to face trial. He was about to give himself up to the U.S. authorities, in Tegucigalpa, and the Hondurans snatched him up. And they did a show and tell with Juan Orlando in chains. And I'm not sure what's going to happen to the site or the protection measures that he started, or what the status of the nonprofit that was devoted to the preservation of this area. I have no idea what's going to happen with any of that, or any of the people involved with that project. And I can talk. I have many more stories about that if people want to hear about it. So back to the Earth Archive. Basically, my experience in Honduras, my experience being dropped into this pristine place, my experience understanding how it changed significantly just in the 6 or 8 months from the time we first went there to the time we went back to excavate those materials. And I can tell you there now is plastic there all over the site. My experience in that environment led me to start this Earth Archive project, because it made me understand how fragile the Earth is, how many places there are left to document, and how little time we have to do that before these environments change fundamentally due to the climate crisis. So the Earth Archive basically is an unprecedented effort to promote the three-dimensional LiDAR scanning the entire surface of the Earth. We're starting with areas that are most threatened. And to our way of thinking, that's the Amazon, in Southeast Asia, parts of Africa, and ironically, parts of the Western United States, where we've already begun scanning, and we hope to begin scanning in the Amazon sometime this year. And the mission of the Earth Archive is really threefold: document, create a baseline record of the Earth as it is today, to more effectively mitigate the climate crisis, explore, build a virtual planet, a digital twin accessible to any number of scientists so we can better understand the world today, and third, inherit, preserve the record of the Earth for our grandchildren's grandchildren so they can study and recreate our lost cultural and ecological heritage. The holodeck on Star Trek, this is the way that it's going to be done. These are the baseline data to actually create that. And I think, like Notre Dame, we can't imagine how these records will be used, but we know that they'll be critically important. And what's critically important for the Earth Archive is to open source everything. We're making all of these data free. And over the last year, basically, this is how we spent our COVID time, creating partnerships, raising money, cementing the organization of the Earth Archive, and just hopefully in a week or so, as soon as we can get the website together, we're going to release data from our first Earth Archive scan, which is a highly intensive, high resolution scan of areas of the Golden Gate recreation area, just north of San Francisco, including Muir Woods and Mount Tam. And here are some data from that Muir Woods scan. And if you scan this QR code down here in the corner, you'll be able to go and sort of see a poster that is about, it's kind of about Muir Woods. And here's some animations from that first scan. Using some AI from one of our corporate partners, we were able to go through these data, automatically ID every tree in Muir Woods, geolocate it, so get a UTM for that tree, and get its height. And I have one of my students, and I was just talking about this before the talk, who came to study ancient urban planning at Angamuco with me for a class project. He started to use these Muir Woods data to run biomass and carbon sequestration estimates. And what he found was, one, nobody really knows how many trees are in Muir Woods. which is surprising because Muir Woods it's basically just north of San Francisco. It's highly studied. Nobody knows how tall the trees are in Muir Woods because they're kind of difficult to actually measure. Supposedly the highest tree in Muir Woods was 76.3 meters tall. We've got several trees that are over 80 meters. Using our data, we can demonstrate that they're over 80 meters. And the biomass estimates are way too high, we think, although we have a lot more work to do on this than those that have been published. This is super critically important. And we believe that what we can do when we begin scanning the Amazon is go through and ID every tree and get its height. We believe that we can use some other data to get species, get highly accurate biomass estimates, also do the archaeology and all of this other stuff. That's why I say that sometimes I don't really even feel like an archaeologist anymore, because we're so focused on doing this work. And we hope to begin scanning other places in California, here in Colorado, the Mountain West, and the Amazon this year, and open sourcing the data. So how can you get involved? You can help sponsor scans, in-kind donations, participate in Earth Archive events. You can help us spread the word. You can go to the website, etc. You can ask me any question you want. You can contact me after the talk, ask me questions. How long will it take to record the world's surface using LiDAR? We are saying that we can do it in 10 to 15 years. It will take getting the permissions, the social piece of getting the permissions and all of that sort of stuff is harder than actually the tech that's involved in doing it. We believe that we can crunch the data in 5 years after the scans are done. But for us, the most important thing is to actually collect that data. And it is serving as a data bank for current and future research questions. In terms of costs, we've been telling everybody that we can scan the entire Amazon for $20 million in less than 10 years, probably 5 years. And we believe that it would take $5 billion with a B to scan the entire surface of the planet. It's a lot of money. It sounds like a lot of money, but when you think about what you're actually getting back for those data, it's such a sound, incredible investment. And I'll just start answering some of these questions, Jane and Bettina, if that's okay.
Yep, absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay, so where are the cache artifacts from Mosquitia currently housed? What types of analysis are being done? This is a super great question. They built at the airfield that we're using as our sort of forward operating base, or jump off point for to get into the jungle. There's an airfield next to the city of Catacamas. It's called El Aguacate. And using, I don't actually know where the money came from, but they the president funded the construction of a small museum and research center there with a couple of dormitories, I believe. So we had a promise from them that the artifacts would stay. And one of the things we really pushed for as much as we could. And of course, after the excavation, we documented all the artifacts, cataloged them. A lot of them were scanned, 3D scans were done, high resolution 3D scans were done. And then we turned all of the artifacts over to the Honduran government. But they promised us that, one, the artifacts would stay together, because that's a huge fear is that some of the artifacts that people sort of consider to be more fantastic would be taken back to Tegucigalpa and the other stuff would just be left. So that, one, they promised us the artifacts would stay together. And two, that they would stay there in Catacamas and not be moved back to Tegucigalpa, because we thought they would be better treated, moving them back and forth, and they would be better treated where they actually were. As far as I know, that's still the case, though everything is everything's totally in flux. And with what's happened to Juan Orlando Hernandez, I mean, I think it's pretty clear he's going to get extradited back to the States, and he's going to end up probably serving a life sentence for narco-terrorism. I don't know what the status of the site or any of that stuff is going to be. TDAR have parallel data sets, one for public, one for academic research. Is that the plan? So how will we ensure that cultural sites will not be at risk? This is a huge issue, and it's a huge problem. And there's two schools of thought on this, and I don't know which one is correct, but I will tell you the one that I tend to believe. I don't think that exposing the location, I don't think that open sourcing the locations of the sites actually causes looting. In most instances, I've been to hundreds of archaeological sites. They've all been looted, sometimes in antiquity, sometimes recently. Generally speaking, the looters know where the archaeological sites are and the archaeologists don't. And there is some evidence to support that. So the State Archaeological Society in Arizona open sourced the location of all the archaeological sites in Arizona. And there have been a couple of studies that have suggested that it actually helped prevent looting rather than cause looting. So the only site that I have seen that's been discovered that was looted after the location was made known is actually the city of the Jaguar. And that may have been done for political reasons, not for the traditional, not for the typical reasons that sites are looted for. How can we prevent this kind of looting? I don't think we can, unfortunately. And I might be wrong. Maybe we should be protecting the locations of these sites. This is a question, incidentally, with these kinds of high resolution data that is not for archaeology alone. So when we scanned Muir Woods, they kind of asked us gently if we would not release the locations of the tallest trees. Because again, they don't want the people climbing them or doing whatever they're doing there, even though that whole area is a national monument, it's completely protected. In the end, we will release the data, we just won't release the tags that show where the tall trees are. There's about 16,000 trees in Muir Woods, based on our estimates. 16,000 trees in Muir Woods and Mount Tam State Park. Within space technology being implemented within this process. So there are LiDAR instruments in space, and there's a LiDAR instrument on the ISS, the International Space Station, called JEDI. The acronym is JEDI, and their Twitter handle is the Jedi Knights. I'm sorry, I'm a huge nerd, but I think that's so awesome. It's a great instrument and it's an incredible program, but the resolution is not high enough for what we require. So they're posting about one ground return, so one return on the ground per about 16 meters or so. We're asking for about 10 ground returns for every square meter. So significantly higher resolution. We think that we're about 30 years off, with a caveat, we're about 30 years off from having we're about 30 years off from having a space-based LiDAR instrument that can do what we need it to do. And unfortunately, we absolutely can't wait that long. But with the following caveat, if Elon Musk or somebody like that really got a bee in their bonnet, maybe they could create an instrument sooner. But given the trajectory that we're on now, that's the kind of time frame that we're talking about. And again, we don't believe that we can wait that long, unfortunately.
Okay.
That's all the questions that I see.
Yeah, it looks to me like we no longer have any in the chat. Okay, so Jane, do you have any final words?
I would just like to thank everyone for hanging with us during the 2021-22 season, and just know that the officers and planning committee of your local AIA will be working to put together the schedule of lectures and activities for next year. And we'll be in touch with all those things through our typical channels of newsletters and emails and such. So thanks to everyone. And thank you very much, Dr. Fisher, for presenting today.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you guys so much for having me. Look for the release of that article in PNAS on March 9th. If anybody has any questions or they want to contact me, just feel free to send me an email.